Hi, everyone. Well, today's episode is going to be about the Water Wealth Project. And here to explain what it is my guest, Ian Stephen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hello, Nancy. It's fun to be on. I've watched a few episodes recently. Saw Melody Rose and Karen Bondar. It's great to have a show like this where you can see local people talking about the things they care about, the things they're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. So, what is the Water Wealth Project?
It's a Chilliwack-based volunteer organization focused on freshwater issues, which covers so many things. Water touches so many parts of our lives and has such a huge variety of threats. It's kind of funny when I first got involved. Waterwell started in 2013, and I joined as a volunteer. Initially, kind of puzzled, and I'm imagining a lot of people feel the same way because here we have so much rain, and there's so many lakes and rivers. And when I first got involved, I was thinking, why are they starting an organization about fresh water? It rains all the time. We have so much water here. But once getting involved, there was actually an initial training session where the Canadian Freshwater Alliance had a 3-day training thing happening. That Waterwell's initial training was a 5-day thing that overlapped with the 3-day thing that the Canadian Freshwater Alliance was doing. And Canadian Freshwater Alliance had brought people that were working on water issues from all over the country to a place up near toward Whistler for this training session, and it was really eye-opening to hear from people from so many different parts of the country facing so many different issues and doing all kinds of great work to deal with those issues. So by the time we came back from that training at the very beginning of Water Wealth, I was absolutely hooked on what the organization does. And initially, it was largely looking at the water sustainability, well, not in those days, the Water Sustainability Act exactly, but modernization of BC water law. We had an old Water Act that had started initially in like 1909, and societal values change and technology changes. There's been so much change since then. And a Water Act modernization process had been underway, but it seemed to kind of stall. So we tried to make water an issue in the 2013 provincial election, I think with some success. Mm-hmm. And not long after that, not all are doing by any means, but we were involved and many groups were working on the same issue. Not long after that election, a legislative proposal was put forward by the government. And we worked on kind of spreading the word and enabling public engagement with the consultation process that the government made available. And that was followed by what we have now, the Water Sustainability Act, which still needs a lot of work. I mean, it's a major change. There's lots of regulations and policy that need to be developed. And one of the things when that act first came into force, it came out with a regulation that actually prohibited consideration of environmental flows on the groundwater licenses of the estimated 20,000 non-domestic groundwater users in the province. And this was the first time groundwater had been regulated in BC. And that issue of environmental flows is very, very important because in much of BC, the groundwater and surface waters are really one system. They're very much connected. And so you can't just regulate surface waters and ignore groundwater. And ignoring environmental flows on those 20,000 large users' licenses would really hobble the benefit that this new law was bringing. And so Water Wealth and Watershed Watch Salmon Society campaigned pretty hard on that particular regulation, and it got changed. I think it could be better. They made it so that the decision makers on those licenses have the discretion to consider environmental flows. I would have preferred to see it mandatory, and that consideration is guided by policy. We would rather see it in regulation. So there's all kinds of things like that could be worked on. But then the next thing that the next main thing that Water Wealth kind of got dragged into, unfortunately, was the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. And that just consumed our capacity for years. And so pulled us away from the Water Sustainability Act and some other things that we would have loved to be engaging on. And still, I mean, the route hearings here for that pipeline have ended. Unfortunately, we were not successful in getting the route changed. It goes through some key salmon habitat areas. It's upstream of the nature reserve. It goes right past city wells, upstream of Euro's wells. There's so many problems. We tried to get the route changed, as did the city and the school board and the District Park Advisory Council and numerous landowners. But the regulator decided in the company's favor, so they're building on their old 1953 route. We have residential areas in Chilliwack that are the densest as far as properties per unit pipeline length, the densest on the entire project are here in Chilliwack. And in other developed areas like Burnaby, Coquitlam, Surrey, Langley, Edmonton, the new pipe doesn't follow the old pipe through residential neighborhoods and things like that that it does here. So anyway, the hearings are behind us. We're trying to get away from that now. It keeps coming up to annoy us. In the hearings, they had talked about doing their work in Brown Creek wetlands in the summer when it's as dry as you can get there. And they have a major site where they're going to do a trenchless crossing of the Vedder River. It'll go under Hopedale Slough and Vedder River and Peach Creek. But where all the construction equipment and everything for that crossing will be in Brown Creek wetlands in between Brown Creek and Hopedale Slough. Hopedale Slough is critical habitat for, under the federal strategy for recovery of the sailor sucker. And it's all important salmon and amphibian habitat, trout habitat. And in the hearings, they said they would work there in the summer. But now we noticed that they had filed right of entry applications for the properties to the north and south of there. And so we looked at their construction schedule, and it's showing major trenchless crossings in our area starting in September until March, end of March. So we sent a letter to the CER asking about this, and Trans Mountain replied confirming that, yeah, they want to do that crossing. What did they say now? January to April 2022, which is during the period where there will be salmon eggs and salmon, the young salmon still in the gravel in those streams. It comes into the spawning period for sailor suckers. It overlaps spawning periods for amphibians. It's a wet time of year where they want to be may very well be inundated if we have a heavy rain. They already had a problem like that once on the Coquihalla River, where the river came up suddenly and caught them off guard, overwhelmed their pumps, and they ended up with some generators and an excavator in the river. So we wrote once we had that confirmation from Trans Mountain, we wrote again to the CER. We're waiting to hear back now, hoping that they'll enforce what we see as a commitment to do that work in that location during the summer, not during this very critical time for so many spawning species. The site could be inundated. There could be potentially contamination of groundwater because they're drilling down. The groundwater is almost at surface in that area. And groundwater flows can be an important factor in the spawning gravels in the nearby streams. So we'll see. But we're trying to get past that Trans Mountain project. These things keep coming up, and every time they do, it's days and days of work to go through the old hearing documents and put together letters to CER and whatnot. The new thing that we're really excited about and trying to make our main focus now, get away from the pipeline, is a climate focused watershed monitoring program in the Chilliwack River Valley, into Craig territory. Vischer group of companies here in town donated enough money for us to buy a bunch of temperature loggers. These are a new kind of temperature logger that came out fairly recently that are quite inexpensive and very easy to use compared to what was available before. And so it allows groups like ours to do this kind of thing on this sort of scale. We've got 33 sites from Peach Creek and Brown Creek wetlands all the way up to the far end, like the upper Chilliwack River past the lake, where we've got temperature loggers monitoring hourly temperatures in the main river and in tributaries, most of them in tributaries. And then along with that, at those sites, we'll do water quality monitoring. And then we'll be doing invertebrate surveys and fish surveys. The goal largely is to look for streams that have a natural advantage, because the waters are getting really too hot for fish in many places. We see the Better River and Chilliwack or the Fraser River getting over 20 degrees. You're getting into lethal temperature ranges for salmon. So we're hoping to identify streams that have natural advantages against climate change. And then with that data, try to influence land use decision making and conservation decision making by the Quake Tribe and regional government, provincial government, to get extra protection for those streams that already have a natural advantage and may provide refuge for native species as the temperatures continue to warm. So I'll show you, if I may, I'll disappear for a second, and I'd like to actually show you a picture from that work.
Okay.
Here. This one. And here, get me out of the way of it. This is one of those streams, and I don't know, scientifically, I probably shouldn't be making favorites, but it's one of my personal favorites. Nessaquatch Creek, fairly high up the valley. And that scene, standing over the stream, there was enough turbulence. I could see a little bit of movement down there. So I thought, yeah, there's fish down there, but you couldn't really see them. And I took my camera on the end of a stick and stuck it down in the water, which is something I often do, because I'll do that even in ditches around town. And you'd be amazed at what you see when you stick a camera under the water in places where you can't see. And in this particular pool, it's actually one clip from a video. You see the two big salmon down low in the image. I hope you're seeing that.
Yes, yes.
And then also, they're not as clear, but there's some little ones down low, sort of to the right of those two, right or left, I'm not sure how you're seeing it, more toward the center of the image down low. But there was several big chum spawners in that little pool. And then there was a whole bunch of juvenile coho in the same pool. And that stream, with the data we have so far, it looks like it stays cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter than most of the streams in the valley. So we're thinking, we're assuming at this point that that's because of a strong groundwater influence. The groundwater tends to be a pretty steady temperature. And so this could be one of those streams that is exceptionally good for native species. And of course, there's lots more work to do to try and prove that. But it's one of the streams I'm very excited about in this work.
I always am interested in or fascinated by the short-sightedness of the decision making.
Can be.
The history is there that we the pipeline, the leaks, so it's all there. Mm-hmm. And yet it seems to be, well, I don't know how those decisions are how those things are made. One of the things you talked about at the beginning is like the Water Wealth Project, the concern of the water, and you talk about how we live in such a rainy area, and mm-hmm. yet here in Chilliwack and during the summer, we're limited to when we can water our gardens, whatever, to 2 days a week, right? And because we have that fear of running out of water, and mm-hmm. the summers are getting hotter, which means it's going to obviously get worse. At least I think it will be, right? Mm-hmm. That seems to be the future anyway. And yet all these, I don't know, is that the lobbyists, like, I don't get the other side of it.
No.
You know?
And it's true, we're not as water secure as we tend to think we are. The Shortsightedness aquifer that the city takes the water from, its main source of recharge is the Better River. The water comes down the Chilliwack River, becomes the Better River, goes into the gravels there and recharges that aquifer. That's the water, and we're a rapidly growing city, right? Our water demand is only going up. But the river is declining. Yeah. I've looked at data for that river going back to 1901, looking at the lowest flow day each year. And that graph is a gradual slope, but steady decline. And then the city did a couple of studies fairly recently, and they had an outfit look at the lowest 7-day period starting in 1951. And there's looking at a 7-day period, it showed an even steeper decline. The precipitation patterns are changing. We're getting more intense precipitation in a smaller part of the year, and less of it as snow, so it's not held in the mountains as much as it used to be. Mm. And the glaciers in the hotter summers, the glaciers are melting faster. Something I don't think has even been looked at yet is the glaciers that feed into that Chilliwack River system. They're mostly in the US. And my fear is that the declining flows that we're seeing now in the summer are actually artificially high because of the more rapidly melting glaciers. And that at some point this century for sure, I think, how quickly, I'm not sure, but at some point those glaciers will reach a critical level where they can't maintain those flows anymore.
Right.
And I fear that we may see a very rapid drop at that point in the flows in that river, and so a drop in the recharge to our aquifer. So yeah, there's a lot of concerns that we don't really think about. And that the lobbying thing that you mentioned, the Water Sustainability Act was a really excellent example of government consultation with the public as they were coming up with that law, with the legislative proposal that they did. But there was somebody at UBC that did a thesis where they looked at the input that the government had received in that process and the policy outcomes that resulted. And they found that industry's input and the public input diverged, and the policy outcomes followed the industry input. So I think that illustrates what we're up against.
Yes, unfortunately, yeah. So as an individual, is there anything that I can do?
Always, depending on context, as individual things come up, there's in our homes we can deal with our own water efficiency with low flow taps and low flow showers and lower flush toilets. And the city, I haven't looked really recently, but they had programs where they would support that with I don't know if grants was the word, but they would help pay for if you were renovating and you wanted to change out an old toilet for a low volume flushing toilet, they would help cover that cost and these sorts of things. So we can do that sort of thing in our own homes. And then think about water issues when you're voting or
Right.
engaging in the community. Encourage the city to take action.
Yeah.
We're always looking for volunteers. It's been difficult with COVID, unfortunately.
Yes.
But a key aspect of the program we're doing all up through the Chilliwack watershed is the public engagement. We need volunteers to be out there doing these surveys and looking after the temperature loggers.
So for a volunteer could just contact you at www.waterwealthproject.com.
Yeah, or by email, ian@waterwealthproject.com.
Okay, I'll make sure both of those are included.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then there's always, there's always these little things that pop up. There's developments where one that we got involved in, some residential development happened in kind of the headwaters of Luckagut Creek. And we would have loved to see the developer keep that sort of headwaters area. It's a part of the creek that's flowed seasonally. But that creek used to connect to the Chilliwack River years and years ago, and it's been built over. And so that the headwaters of it get pushed down as this development continues. We were hoping in this case the developer would keep that and make it a natural feature in the middle of his residential development, make it part of the rain management system for that development and a protected habitat area, but it didn't happen. They filled it over, built on top of it. One where there was a wind, there was a hazardous waste facility. I don't know if you remember that. Evitas was proposed to be built right beside the Fraser River on the Cattermole lands.
Not right.
And we got involved. There was quite a large coalition opposing that project, which brought us into conflict with the city, unfortunately, because they really wanted that development. That was a long fight. And it was a good design, and they were going to be recycling PCBs and things like this that needed service. But the location was terrible. And eventually the company withdrew that proposal, and they did build the facility a little bit different, but basically the same facility over in Maple Ridge on higher ground in a safer location, which is what we were saying all along needed to be done. It just was a bad location for that sort of facility. So things like that come up all the time, and we absolutely need public support and engagement when
Right.
issues like that arise.
Right.
Because like if it's just us, that doesn't count. It's got to
Yeah,
be the
for sure.
community.
Yeah, it's getting that word out there that people need to hear about it. Because until I saw your profile, I think that's how I connect with you on Facebook. I knew nothing about this. You know, and yet I try to keep up with things, but you know, I'm just learning that there is so much that I don't know. So that's why it's important for me, like doing this show, that I do get to learn these things, and I do maybe help a little bit by getting the word out, right?
Yeah.
So, because this will air today, and hopefully some people will see it, and then if you can share it as well, then
Absolutely.
that'll, you know, and it goes up on Tumblr and Twitter and all those places, right? So I think we're just about out of time, but I have a quick question for you, because you were, or maybe still are, an electrician, right?
I was, until I got involved in water wealth, and then it was a scary decision, but 2014, I decided I'm going to let that all lapse, the business license and everything else, and I'm going to just do this because this engaged my heart so much. And boy, it's really put the nonprofit in nonprofit.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge.
Right.
But
Well,
I sure love what we do.
One of the things, just one more question before we go. And I'm just wondering about, like, when I lived in my house, I'm now in a condominium, but when I lived in a house, when we bought the house, they had a hot water tank that was right in the middle of the kitchen. And we decided to change that and go for one of the waterless tanks.
Oh yeah.
Water on demand, I guess it's called. Yeah. And like, we thought it was a great thing, because you don't have water sitting there, or when it goes, like in this building, we had one of our boilers just flood everything, you know, when it broke down, which you would not have with the water on demand. So what do you think about those? Are they a good idea?
I believe so, yeah, as I understand anyway. They are, you know, they have a high power demand when they're running, right? Because they have to be able to heat that water very quickly.
Yes.
So say if you're doing an electric one, which would be preferable, you can get them electric, you can get them gas. In BC, a lot of our electricity comes from long established hydroelectricity. So that would be the less carbon version. And plus the fracking is, as a water issue, the fracking up north is just brutal to get gas. So I would suggest an electric one, but then you'd have to make sure that your house's electrical service can handle that demand too.
Sure.
But certainly the efficiency, you're not keeping a big tank of water hot all the time. You're only heating it when you need it. Yeah, absolutely good for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And if it breaks down, like I said, you're not losing all of that water.
Big tank of water on the floor. That happened in our house too one time. I was heading out for work in the morning, and I came back because I'd forgotten something, opened the basement door, and the basement was, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches deep in hot water steaming down there. I was very glad I came back to get something.
For sure. Anyway, on that note, we're going to end this just on camera while I say goodbye to the audience. Thank you for watching, everybody. And I'm going to include the information. If you want to get involved, please contact Ian at the web at his email address that I will include. Thank you for watching, everybody. Stay safe and peace out. If I can find the off button.